ครับขอต้อนรับเข้าสู่งานสัมมนา IP Value and Presentation for Impact Workshop ผมชนะพุทธานนท์นะครับทำหน้าที่ดำเนินรายการในวันนี้ครับก่อนอื่นเลยผมขอพูดถึงสวทช.ได้จัดการอบรมวันนี้ขึ้นเพื่อผลักดันผู้ประกอบการในไทยนักวิจัยเพื่อให้มีโอกาสในการนำเสนอผลงานในต่างประเทศเพื่อขยายขอบเขตการเจรจาธุรกิจการจับคู่ธุรกิจและการลงทุนจากต่างประเทศนะครับเพื่อพัฒนาทักษะในการนำเสนอเพื่อให้ก้าวไปสู่การนำเสนอในเวทีระดับโลกครับและก่อนจะเข้าสู่การอบรมในวันนี้ผมขออธิบายแจ้งกำหนดการเบื้องต้นนะครับในการอบรมวันนี้จะแบ่งเป็น2ช่วงนะครับคือช่วงเช้าจะเป็นการนำเสนอในหัวข้อ IP Value แล้วก็ Presentation for Impact แต่ในช่วงบ่ายหลังรับประทานอาหารกลางวันนะครับจะเป็นโพสต์กรุ๊ปสำหรับผู้ที่เป็นเจ้าของผลงานและตัวแทนที่ได้รับคัดเลือกสำหรับงาน Tech Innovation นะครับและต่อจากนี้ผมขอเรียนเชิญดร. เอ็ดเวิร์ด รูเบกนะครับ Director of Innovation Driven Entrepreneur Program จากมหาลัยหอการค้าให้เกียรติเป็นผู้บรรยายในหัวข้อ IP Value ครับ Ladies and Gentlemen please welcome Dr. Edward
I'm going to try to do this without a microphone because I like to walk around. Okay? So, I have a couple of questions for you guys. First of all, do I understand correctly that some people are not from Thailand here? Besides me? Who is not from Thailand? Raise your hand. Nobody's admitting it. So everyone is from Thailand in the room right now? Okay, because in the message I got, I understood there might be other countries from ASEAN or something. No? Okay, thank you. I think he wants me to sing. Okay, so the other thing I understand, which I may also be incorrect, is that there are some companies in the room that are getting ready to go to Singapore to make a presentation. Is that correct? So I'm partially correct, okay? And the session that we're doing, I'm being helped with Ajahn Will at the back. He's going to do the next hour. He and I have worked together a lot for developing entrepreneurial teams. I'm guessing he might be able to help you more than I can help you because if you don't understand the value of IP at this point, it's too late. So the stuff I'm going to help you, you might have wanted to look at 6 months ago or a year ago, but we'll get into it anyway, okay? So I was told to talk about the value of IP, but like everything, when I'm told to do something, I always change it a little bit. So I changed it to the value of invention, not IP. I'm sorry, TLO people, okay? And the reason for that is sometimes people look at IP in a very narrow sense, a patent, a copyright, something like that, and forget the important part behind the IP, which is the invention. So I really want to talk about the invention. Okay? Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Now, the other part about the discussion here is, let's see if my buttons work. Okay? Ooh, it's pretty small. Sorry about that. There's a difference between invention and innovation. All right, so I want to make sure we're clear on that thing right from the beginning as well. Because I'm actually an engineer, so it's not that I don't like the technology side, but I want us to be aware that the second part of this statement is more important sometimes than the first part, okay? So this is a definition from MIT that innovation, can you see this? It's very, very small. I'll bring it closer, okay? Innovation is equal to invention times commercialization. So who's a researcher in here? Raise your hand if you're a researcher. There's at least one in the room. 3, 4, oh yeah, of course. 5, 6 people are beginning to admit that they're researchers. Okay. So what are the rest of you guys doing here then? If those are the researchers, who is everybody else? There's some TLO people here. TLO people. TLO. You're from the same TLO? What are you guys? You're not a researcher or a TLO person. What do you do? Sorry? Business development. Where? Where? At Chiang Mai University. Okay. Chiang Mai. What do you do? TLO. With him? Where at? TLO where? King Olga University. Okay. So we have some kind of technology commercialization people. I know you. From where? Private sector. From a company. What do you do at the company? Okay, and you are on the sales or marketing side or research, engineering? What do you do specifically? Management. Okay. So you don't do anything. Do you, on technical side or sales or on the engineering side maybe? Okay, great. How about you guys? You're a researcher. Yeah. Patent agent. Where at? At a law firm, university. Which law firm? Okay. You guys? Export, business, private sector. Okay. So what were you? Researcher. Private sector. So who's private sector here? Raise your hand if you're the private sector. Okay, so what is required here is a combination of the research side and a whole bunch of other stuff which is not research. Now normally when I'm asked by NASDA to talk, I'm usually talking to a very technical crowd. So that's the reason I made this presentation is aimed more for a researcher needing to understand. There's a big chunk of private sector people in here, so I think you guys are going to understand a lot of this already. And for those of you who are in business development or working at a TLO, you have to be able to understand both sides of this equation. Okay? So this equation is, there's an invention side, which is kind of scientific research, but then there's this commercialization side, and that's the part that often gets forgotten. So let's take a look at some examples here. Never figure out which way up. Okay, did anybody hear the news? There's a new car that was just released in the United States, a very famous car. What's the car? You're shaking your head like you know. What's the car? It's the Tesla, okay? But not just any Tesla. Which Tesla? You don't know. It's important which one. The Tesla 3, the Model 3, okay? The Tesla Model 3. Does anybody know why this is important, that the Tesla Model 3 was released? First of all, let me ask you a question. Has anybody, raise your hand if you've heard of Tesla, the car company, not the engineer, but the car company. Okay, a few. So the rest of you haven't, or you're not answering my question. So what does Tesla do? You're my Tesla expert. What does Tesla do? Okay, it's a car company, but it's a special type of car company. Electric car company, or electric vehicles, okay? So it's an electric vehicle company, and it's kind of interesting because, I think it's interesting because of the way they innovated. All right, and I think there's an important lesson about technology commercialization here. So first of all, let me ask a question. Now some of you don't know Tesla, but you may know the answer to this question. Did Tesla invent electric vehicles? Did Tesla's a very famous company now. Are they famous for inventing electric vehicles? No. Okay, so why are they famous then? Are they the only electric vehicle manufacturer? No, in fact, there's a whole bunch. If you look at this picture here, these are all pictures. I'll read them for you because this is smaller than I intended. This is the Tesla. This is the Chevrolet Bolt, General Motors, Volkswagen e-Golf, which is Volkswagen BMW i3, Mercedes-Benz B-Class, Ford Focus, Nissan Leaf, Honda Clarity. Every manufacturer has electric vehicle. Every manufacturer has electric vehicle, and they've had it for a long time, by the way. But if you went out and asked anybody who knows Tesla, everyone would consider Tesla the most famous electric vehicle company in the world today. And in fact, Tesla's only delivered, in their whole history, they've only delivered about 150,000 cars total. Ford does that in a couple of weeks. And yet, a year ago, the value of Tesla as a company was greater than the value of Ford. So there's a lot of excitement about Tesla. And I want to know why. Why do you guys think people are excited about this company called Tesla? They didn't invent the car. They're not even the only manufacturer of the electric vehicle. So what did they do that was so great? And by the way, their car isn't necessarily even any better than anyone else's car. But they did something that was kind of clever. Okay? So let's talk about electric vehicles for a second, just as a case study about commercialization, because it's an important lesson to any of us who are trying to launch a new technology. Why aren't we driving electric vehicles today? Do electric vehicles have benefits? What are some of the benefits of electric vehicles? Saving what? Saving money. They're more expensive. Okay, so saving on operating costs. So they're more expensive to buy, but they're lower operating costs. Okay, that's one thing. What other benefits do electric vehicles have, maybe? Nicer for the environment. But we don't care about the environment. Do we? So when was the last time you paid extra for an environmental benefit? Not many people do. He may be the only one in the room who ever has paid extra for environmental benefit. Okay? Not many people are willing to pay extra. If it's the same price, we'll take the environmental benefit, but not many people are willing to pay extra. Okay, so this is one of the problems. Electric vehicles have been around. They seem to have some benefits. They lower operating costs, may be good for the environment. Why aren't people using them? What are the bad things about electric vehicles? They're expensive. Okay, expensive to buy up front. What's the other bad thing about electric vehicle? Okay, it has a limited range, right? So for most of us who drive a gas or diesel benzene powered car, we can drive 600 kilometers or 800 kilometers before we have to buy more fuel. Most electric vehicles you can go about 200. And that's scary to people. I mean, even if you convince them you're only driving around the city, no problem. Even if you convince them that, they're kind of scared. Okay, so one issue is the range. What's another limitation of electric vehicles? There's no charging time, and what's the other issue with charging? Charging stations, right? So there's the charging time and the charging station. So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure in place for regular cars that doesn't exist for electric vehicles. But still, Tesla has somehow created some excitement about electric vehicles. Let's find out why, because for me, this is a very, very valuable lesson in technology commercialization. The reason has nothing to do with that car, the Model 3. And in fact, there's an interesting quotation here. This is from Car and Driver. This is the car which will either save Tesla or kill it. Okay, that's a statement about this model. So even if you don't know Tesla, you've heard it now for a few minutes, and you know that this thing called the Model 3 is sort of important to this company. But it's not the first car they've made. Does anyone know why it's called the Model 3? No, it's not because it's the third car they ever made. It's actually the same size as all these other 3 Series cars, right? Mazda 3, BMW 3. It's kind of that small car, the C car segment. It's actually the 4th car they've made, the 4th model. So the clever thing was what they did with their very first model car. Here's what the first model looked like. Look it up on your phone if you can't see this picture very clearly. Look up Tesla Roadster. They only sold 2,500 of this car called the Tesla Roadster, but it changed the way people looked at electric vehicles. Why? Why did it change the way people looked at electric vehicles? Well, look at it. It's a sports car. Now here's the weird thing about the sports car. It still has a limited range. There's still no charging stations. I mean, there's more and more, but back when this came out, there were even fewer. So why would an electric sports car get people so excited? Why would an electric sports car get people so excited? Very good performance. Well, it depends on the performance. It has low range. That's bad performance. So what do you mean by good performance? Acceleration. Not necessarily speed, but acceleration. This is the important point. Acceleration. Any electrical engineers in here? Okay. Why do electric vehicles accelerate so well? You have to be an electrical engineer to know. Because of torque. Electric motors have only one advantage over gas motors, and that's torque. Torque turns into acceleration. So most people view electric vehicles as trade-offs. I have to sacrifice low range, I have to sacrifice no charging station, I have to sacrifice a long charging. Everything's a sacrifice. The one place where an electric vehicle has an advantage, the one place, is in fast acceleration. So this is what was clever about Tesla. Tesla took the one characteristic of an electric vehicle and raised it up to be the most important aspect of the car. Everything else is still the same trade-offs. But they took that one thing and raised it up to be the biggest, most significant part. Now why? This is the important question. Why can they get away with it? Why didn't another car maker do this? What's the point of having an electric sports car with limited range? What's the important part about having an electric sports car with limited range? I'm going to ask the TLO expert again. Which TLO are you at? Chiang Mai, okay. So what's the value of having a limited sports car, a high-performance sports car with limited range? What's the value of that? Excitement. For who? I mean, who wants to have a car that you can only drive 200 kilometers before you have to recharge? Although you're on the right track. It does have something to do with excitement. But why didn't another car maker think this way? This is where the real innovation for Tesla came, in my opinion. It's not the technology part, it's the way they position themselves in the market. So what I'm talking to you about is not a technology story. Everyone had the same technology. Now there's some people who claim Tesla was a little bit better at assembling batteries and this and that, and there might have been some small benefits on that. But the biggest benefit was they took the one thing that electric vehicles do better, and they raised it up to made it the most important part. They made it a sports car, and then what did they have to do? They had to find the type of customer who is willing to buy a very expensive, high-performance car that doesn't go very far. So I'll give you the answer first, and then we'll talk about how they did it. The first thing they did was take the one characteristic and raise it up. Second thing they did is they found the best first customer for the car. When you're launching a new technology, don't think about the mass market. Everyone does this. Especially in Thailand, everyone does this because every puya you know who claims to be successful in business got successful selling cement or sugar or beer. Okay? Nobody in Thailand has been successful selling technology, and yet everyone thinks about it like a consumer product. Like shampoo. Everyone thinks like Unilever. We're going to sell more shampoo. Okay? If you're going to sell a new technology, you need to find the one customer who needs you more than anyone. So who is the the one customer who needs a high performance, very expensive, these were $130,000, high performance, very expensive car with very low range. Who is the ideal customer for that? Tell me who that ideal customer is. Who? Racing track, okay, maybe. Millionaire. There's lots of millionaires. There's millionaires all over Thailand, right? Millionaires don't buy this kind of car, they buy Mercedes-Benz. A young millionaire, getting closer. Where do we find young millionaires? Where do we find young millionaires? Okay, we challenge them, but how do we find them? Where's a good place to look for young millionaires? You're thinking, I'm wondering that same question. Where did Tesla find young millionaires, do you think? Where's Tesla located? Anybody know? I mean, even if you don't know, you can take a guess, right? Silicon Valley, everything's in Silicon Valley these days. That's where you find young millionaires who have a lot of money and who don't care about their car in a limited range. Why? Because it's a second car? Okay, could be, but even if it was their first car, why are they there and nowhere else? I mean, there's a few somewhere else, but as a starting market, this is a great car for Silicon Valley. Why? Because of Silicon Valley. What's in Silicon Valley? A whole bunch of young people who started computer companies, made a lot of money and got rich, but they're still young. And what do they want to do? They don't only want to show that they're rich. They buy Mercedes for that. What do they want to show? That they are rich and what? And clever, yeah. But all rich people think they're clever, okay? They want to show that they're rich and tech savvy. They want to show that they are high tech, okay? They didn't make their money in an investment bank, and they didn't make their money selling shampoo or sugar or that kind of stuff. They made their money with a high-tech startup. So they want a car that they can show off, I made money in a high-tech startup. This Roadster was perfect for that. Okay? So the strategy of the company was 2,500 of these at $130,000. Made the company really, really famous, encouraged investment came in, then they moved to another model car, which they called the Model S. The Model S, so far, has sold about 125,000 vehicles. This one they stopped making. This one still exists. So over 4 years, they've sold about 125,000 vehicles. So about 30,000 a year. This car sells for $80,000 a year. So to see what's happening, they find that very, very first customer who's really, really important, who's willing to pay for the technology, who wants that technology better than anyone else. And then they use that to get to a slightly bigger market, and then a slightly bigger market, okay? So the Roadster was that first niche, find the customer who needs them the most. Then the Model S, up to 125,000 vehicles total. They're still selling this car, so it'll continue to grow. And then, what I showed you before, the Model 3. This is the one they expect to become high volume like any other Model 3 that you're familiar with, okay? And that's why it will make or break the company. So the company has done very, very well in that niche market, and now they're trying to make the leap to the mass market, okay? But you have to go through the niche market before you get to the mass market. Everyone gets excited about jumping to the mass market, and that's what kills most technology innovations right from the beginning. Okay? So this is the diagram that I like to show people all the time. Now the business people in here are normally going to get it. Not every business person gets this. Okay? But researchers have a bigger challenge with this kind of diagram. If you are doing something innovative, there are 3 things you can do. I mean, if you're doing something new, I don't care if you're talking about a service or a product, if you incorporate an innovation into it, like a technology innovation, that innovation will either allow you to raise the price, because it's a better product, a higher performance product, more features, whatever. It'll either allow you to raise the price, lower the cost, right? There are technologies that help us lower cost, or increase the quantity that you sell. Now you can see the Q part is not so important here because Q is related to P or C, right? If you've got this technology that allows you to do one of these two things, you can manage that to change that. So the Q is kind of a function of P and C. The P and C are the important parts of this discussion. Okay? Remember, what was Tesla's first car? How much did it sell for? $130,000. It was the highest priced car they sell. They knew to launch successfully, they needed to find a customer willing to pay a large amount of money and willing to get that high value. And then they work downwards. Unfortunately, most strategies that I've been involved with, we always say, oh, we can save money, we can do it cheaper. Our technology allows it to be done cheaper. Very, very difficult to win on doing things cheaper. I know it seems like it's a great strategy, but here's the problem with doing something cheaper. Let me get a picture here. Oops. Actually, let me go right here. How far can you lower the cost of something? How far can you lower the cost of something? Just to zero, right? That's it. But no matter how great your technology is, you can go from whatever your cost is today and you can head towards zero. You're never going to get to zero, but you can head towards zero. On the other hand, if your technology is great, how far can you raise the price? It's unlimited. Maybe 2 times, maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times. So people tell me all the time, they say, Ajahn Ed, you don't understand Thai people. They say, Thai people always have to buy stuff at a discount. Okay? And I say to them, I agree with you, I don't understand you. Because I've been in the US when the first Apple iPhone was launched, and there were Thai people who flew from here over to the US, paid extra, and stood in line to get that phone. I thought, that doesn't seem like they're trying to lower cost. Okay? So when something is valuable enough for any of us, even if we're Thai, we will pay more for it. As long as there are no other alternatives. Okay? So look for ways that you can create value in unique ways with your innovations, and you can multiply P. But if you're trying to save costs, you can only go down and you'll never ever get to zero. Okay? So unfortunately, lots and lots of people are focused on saving costs, but the real opportunities for innovations are finding ways to do things that are so valuable you're able to raise the price. So another question I get asked all the time, what is a way of measuring the value of an innovation? Well, it's very difficult. But one way of trying to measure the value of innovation is how much more somebody's willing to pay because your innovation is in that product or that service. Okay, so one, it's not a direct measure, but one measure is the willingness to pay more because they find your innovation more valuable. Okay? So for everyone in the room, please try to, as soon as you see an innovative opportunity, try to find ways to be raising price, not to trick the customer, that's not the goal, but to find those customers who really see that value and are willing to pay extra for that value, just like that first Tesla Roadster. And find those customers first, the people who really need you and who are willing to pay for your value, and use that to launch your product. Okay? Because the invention part is only a little bit. It's the way we approach the market which changes the value of our innovation. Okay, the invention's fine, but it's really the way we view the marketplace, including how we choose our first customers. Okay? Now there's a couple of other things as well. I've talked about most of this stuff, so I'm going to leave this for now. So we talked about IP. All right, it was in the title of the talk I'm supposed to be giving you. All right, and for those of us who work or worked, I was supposed to give you some history of myself. All right, so I used to work at the Technology Licensing Office at NSTDA with some of my friends who are here. Okay, and in that role, I was trying to combine technology licensing with the entrepreneurship work that I've done for many, many years. So trying to put these two things together. And one of the challenges in a technology licensing office, at a place like NASDA anyway, sometimes the value of IP is viewed as being too valuable. We put a lot of effort into doing training to secure IP and make sure nobody copies it and all of this stuff. And really, we don't put nearly enough time into trying to figure out whether that IP is valuable to anybody. Okay? So I want us to really keep that in mind. The most important thing you can be imagining right now is who is that first important customer. Okay? So try to remember that Tesla story when you're thinking about your inventions or thinking about bringing innovation to marketplace. Because IP is only one start. So if you're a researcher, you do some IP, you come up with some invention, you get some IP protection, maybe it's a patent, maybe it's some other form of protection. That's only the start of the process. So what else has to happen? From the time that IP gets formed in the lab, what else has to happen? What's next? Researchers, you can start the process. You've done the research, you get the IP. What has to happen after that? This is a question for you guys. Wake up. What has to happen after the invention and after the IP? You have to think of the business model. Okay, so what's a business model? I hear that word all the time. I'm not sure what it means. What's a business? So she said you have to think of a business model. What's a business model? This feels like a room that's probably done a lot of business model canvas or something. Right? That's a popular training program these days with the Thai government, the business model canvas. By the way, if you want to sell a framework, or if you want to be a consultant, you should use cartoon characters. It sells better. Okay? What's a business model? So she said that you have to find the IP and make it into a business model. What does that mean? There's more chairs coming. What does that mean? You have to find a business model.
In my opinion, I don't know what's the real thing, but I think that first thing is that what's the product and who's the customer, where to sell and how will you sell it, the sales projection, the investment cost or something.
Okay. That sounds like a pretty good start. Anybody want to add to that? So what was the first thing? Who's the customer? What product does it go into? Where are you going to sell? Anything else you want to add? Is that it? Sounds easy enough. What else do we need to do? What else do we need to do? How to make value in the market. Okay, so finding that customer, finding a product for the customer, finding the value. Another piece when we use the word business model is how do we make money from it? Okay? And I know researchers always say, well, I'm not doing it for the money, I'm doing it for scientific knowledge. Okay? Good. Okay. But nonetheless, in the world we live in, for better or for worse, one measure of value is how much people are willing to pay for it. All right? So we can think of one aspect of the business model is the revenue model. Okay? But I tend to not worry about money too early on. Okay? For me, the most important step is to find the value first. If you're doing something valuable, I believe, or I at least hope, it's not as strong as a belief, but it's a hope, if you're doing something valuable, eventually you'll find a way to get paid for it. Okay? Whereas if you focus too much on making money, you kind of skip over a lot of opportunities. Because if it's a real clear path to money, it's not usually that innovative because everybody already understands it. Okay, so let's take a couple of these pieces, these comments, and break them into smaller pieces. You have to find a customer. You have to find a product. Well, who's a customer of technology? Who's a customer of technology? Let's ask our TL expert. Who's a customer of technology?
The person who needs it.
Okay, the person who needs it. All right. When was the last time you bought some technology?
Yesterday.
Really? What'd you buy?
Like a gadget from Alibaba.
So you bought a gadget from Alibaba which you think has some technology in it. Right? But we don't buy technology. And I know we kind of think we do, but we don't buy technology, we buy the product. So how did the technology get into the product? How did the technology get into the product? Huh? What was that? The private sector. Okay, let's be a little more specific.
Maybe sometimes is produced from the technology and to licensing to the produce in the product.
Okay,
So, yes, and push to the market.
Okay, don't use that word push yet.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe that's what has to happen. But before we get to the word push, so that's an important part of the process we need to recognize, and it sounds like at least some of you in the room have already done that. The technology needs to get into a product, and normally it's going into a product that kind of already exists. Right? The need is kind of understood. The customer is kind of out there somewhere. And even some sort of product already exists. Like, remember let's go back to our picture of all these cars. Every one of these cars, Chevrolet, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Ford, Nissan, Honda, are all electric versions of regular old gas-powered cars. Right? It's, no matter what we might dream of, it's very, very unlikely that we're going to come up with a technology that goes into a product the world has never seen before. Because those are very, very difficult to sell. If the world has never seen it, the world doesn't know it needs it. And so many, many times the world continues not seeing it. It doesn't go anywhere. Okay? So most of the time in the role any of us are going to be in, that technology or IP goes into usually an existing product or an existing company. And even if it's a startup, it's going into a situation where there's a customer who already understands how to use it. Okay? It's very, very risky to be in a situation where the technology is completely new and the application is completely new. The market risk. Okay? So what we're talking about here, to go back to my picture, there are both technology things that need to go on and market things that need to go on. So these two things here. So I'm using the word technology to describe how we go from the science to something that has a practical application. But my point is that's not enough. Even once we've got a practical application of the science, there's a whole bunch of development that needs to go on at the customer side or the market side. Okay? And so this is why we have to recognize, when we're talking about the value of IP or the value of the invention, it's not set here. There's no value of the IP at this point. There's no value of the invention at this point. Beyond the scientific knowledge, which is important in its own way, but when it comes to commercialization, there's no value at that point. So I've been asked many, many, many times to do workshops on calculating the value of IP, and I say it's what? What's the value of IP? Should I ask our TLO expert again? We have other TLO experts from Chiang Mai. What's the value of? Oh, you're not. What were you? Oh, business development. Oh, sorry. So you're not allowed to do business development. Okay. We understand. So What is the value of IP at the right side when it first comes out of the laboratory? Oh. Okay, so that is one belief. Okay, that the value of your IP is the money that you invest in research. So the more money you put in the research, the more valuable it is. We should double our research budget, make the IP more valuable. Okay, remember we're talking about the context only of commercialization, so I'm not commenting about the value in any other realm, but in terms of commercialization. Sorry, I cut you off. Do you want to add?
Sorry.
I thought I cut you off. Did you have another comment? Okay. So what is the value when it comes out there? Is it really the amount of money we put into our research? No. Because I mean, we may be doing research for years, and our research may be building on other people's research to get to the point where it can have some sort of patent or IP. All right? So what's the value at this point? This is the question TLOs are asked all the time. What is the value of technology at the beginning of the process? TLOs are asked this question all the time. Estimate the value of this. Right? The researcher wants to know, the head of the science park wants to know, the head of Sawato wants to know, what is the value of this IP? What's the answer?
Like only opportunity cost.
Okay.
It should be made in the future.
It should be made in the future. Okay? So one answer is not zero. Okay? Sometimes when I'm being very cynical, I say it's worth nothing. That's not true. Okay? But we don't know the value. We don't know the value until it gets commercialized. And more importantly, all of these steps have an outcome on the value. All of these steps. Okay, so the invention itself, standing alone, can't be valued. It's the way it gets combined with a whole bunch of other steps in the process. Does anybody play Instagram in here? You know Instagram? Do you play Instagram? Yes? Is it good? Yeah? I've never played, so I don't know. But Instagram was bought by Facebook several years ago now, 8 years ago now. Anybody know how much they paid for it? Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion. $1 billion for an app that can make you look better. Can make a picture of you look better than in real life. Okay? And put funny pictures on you and let you to write. $1 billion. And at the time, in fact, there were several competing technologies that all did kind of the same thing, right? All that filtering. How did Instagram end up being worth $1 billion and all those other ones today are worth nothing? Or they got bought for very small amounts, or they're incorporated into free apps. But for some reason, Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion. Now, I don't know why they bought it for $1 billion, but I know one of the investors on the deal, and he said Facebook wanted the Instagram customers. The users, that's right, they wanted the users. Now, that's a weird comment. It had nothing to do with the technology. There were several companies that probably all did almost exactly the same thing. But the value of that technology was somewhere in here. Was the fact that Instagram had reached a certain number of users and was growing at a certain rate that made it valuable to Facebook for $1 billion. Okay, so this is the challenge we have when we're talking about the value of IP, is it's not that IP has no value. It's very valuable, but the value only comes out in the way we do a whole bunch of other things. Now, what are some of those other things? We got a couple of ideas earlier. I'll kind of add them to my list. Okay, so the one way of looking at the process is once it's kind of coming out in the form of IP, then there's kind of a next step where it gets made into a first level prototype. Okay, somebody needs to work on that prototype. And you may have to do many prototypes, right? One prototype's not enough, but you go through that prototype development, and then eventually you do some product testing, and then after product testing you get into a product development that somebody can use. Right? There's a difference between a prototype that works and a product that somebody's willing to use. Okay, a whole bunch of development goes on there, and then even once you're there, you're not done, because then you need to build it so it's easy to manufacture, so it's not too expensive when you manufacture it. Okay, and then even then, somebody has to go out and find sources of the parts and suppliers, and this is only what might be called the technology development side of the process. Every one of those steps have the opportunity to potentially add value or take value away from the IP. Okay, and we've only gone halfway. We haven't even looked at the market development part, okay, which is communicating with customers and telling them why they need this new technology or this new innovation, okay, and delivering the product. This was a killer for a lot of technology that we worked on at NASDA. Maybe it still is today. A lot of the technology in Thailand or a lot of the research in Thailand is focused on agricultural technology. Very, very important for Thailand. But deploying agricultural technology is very, very challenging everywhere in the world. Okay, so I mean, Thailand has this challenge. It's a very strong agricultural country, but no country in the world is very good at incorporating technologies into agriculture. Why? Because it has to be dispersed over a very wide area, and usually the first people buying it, like farmers, are very risk averse, because they make a change and they don't learn about the change for 6 months or 9 months, and if they lose everything. Okay, so this idea of delivering the product is not an insignificant challenge. In fact, this is the challenge, to go back to our car example, that Tesla's going to have. Remember when I told you about the Roadster? 2,500 vehicles sold to young technology geeks who sold out IPO in Silicon Valley. Do you know how many showrooms they had? 1. If your car broke down, you went to that showroom. Okay? But now as they're getting to a Model 3 and they're trying to sell hundreds of thousands, they need a dealership network. They need service. Okay? So distribution can be as big a part of the challenge as anything. So we may think we have a great technology, but a lot of our technologies at NASDA broke down simply because they couldn't get into a product that got distributed out to the people they were intended to help. Okay? Agriculture technology especially is challenging in this area, and it's not a challenge only for Thailand, it's a challenge for the US. And it's the reason that in most countries the agriculture industry is only made up of 3 or 4 major companies who control everything. I'll show you a slide on that in a minute. Why? Because distribution is such an important and challenging part of the process that only big companies survive. Okay? And even if you're able to deliver the product, depending on the type of product, you even have to be able to provide after-sales service. So every one of these things on the blue side, normally we just kind of think of that as business stuff. And it is business stuff, but it affects the value of our technology. If we can't address these things, we're not going to be able to get a new technology into a product or service. Okay, so this is, I can see this is not very good contrast. But this is what I was telling you about the supply chain. So even the supply chain, the nature of the supply chain, affects our ability to value inventions and IP. So let me describe this, even though you can't see it very clearly up here. I'm showing 3 different types of supply chains here. So one supply chain is a fully integrated supply chain. This is in industries where one company controls everything, from the sourcing of raw materials almost all the way through to selling to the end consumer. Okay? I'll describe the supply chains first, and then we'll talk about examples. So that's called a vertically integrated supply chain. All right? In the middle here is just a regular old supply chain where there's a manufacturer, or let's say there are component manufacturers who sell to an assembler, who sells to a distributor, who sells to smaller retailers, who sell directly to consumers, okay? That's kind of a normal SME industry. Every single intermediary is a separate, independent step. And then there's another chain down here, which is kind of a hybrid between these two. The steps are individual, but there's somebody with a lot of power to drive the supply chain, okay? So I'm in that industry. I come from automotive, okay? I come from the automotive industry. And in the automotive industry, you have independent parts suppliers, and they sell to what are called tier 1 suppliers, and they sell to the automaker, and the automaker sells to a dealer. I own some dealerships in Bangkok. So they're all individual steps, but the automaker controls everything, right? They are so much more powerful. They control all the suppliers, they control the assembly, they control the dealers, okay? So that's the case down here. This case here is most industrial products, right? Most industrial products that you would buy, there are small producers, and then they sell through a whole bunch of chains of intermediaries until it gets to the final product. And then the top one is fully integrated. So let's think of some examples, first of all, of this one. What's an example of a fully integrated supply chain? That one company kind of owns everything, or most of everything. Okay, so CP might be an example of that, except does CP do any farming? Do they? I thought they passed that risk off to the contract farmers. A few. CP produces their own chicken? Okay. I don't know enough. I mean, I know a lot of contract manufacturers for CP. So, but one example of this outside of Thailand is pharmaceutical companies. Right? Pharmaceutical companies do everything. They do, well, actually we'll keep R&D out for a minute because that's changed a little bit. But that they do the manufacturing. It's a small pill. It doesn't take much. They do the manufacturing. They do all the distributing. They sell directly to the end users. If not the end users, they sell directly to the hospital who sells it to the end user. Okay? So pharmaceuticals especially are heavily integrated. Sometimes one company controls the whole thing. This one down here, as I said, automotive is a lot like this. And I had always kind of thrown CP into this category. I may not be correct on that. I've thrown CP in this category because CP controls much of the supply chain, but they also have contract farmers and they have independent sellers of seed and stuff like that, but they've got so much power they can control. Okay? But it doesn't really matter who's right or wrong. It really is just to understand that there's different supply chains and then to ask the question, how does this affect the value of IP? Okay? So let's first of all understand the three. Fully integrated from start to finish. Individual intermediaries but heavily controlled by one powerful player, or just a set of many individual steps in an industry. Which one is the easiest one to incorporate a new technology? Which one's the easiest one to launch or incorporate a new technology? The first one. The second one. First one or second one? Does anyone want to vote to break the deadlock? Someone want to vote the third one so we have it fair? Well, of course it depends on what you mean by easy. Okay, so why did you say the first one was easier? Okay, you can control everything by yourself, so it's easier. Why did you say the second one was easier? Okay, so did you guys hear that? He said the first one's easier because the company controls everything. She said the second one's easier because there's lots of small companies, so it's easy to approach. Actually, I agree with both of them. They're both easier in different ways, which means they're both harder in different ways. Okay? This one, if you are able to convince the company to license your technology, it becomes easier. But it's a much bigger challenge to get them to adopt your technology. right? You're dealing with a very big player, they're very sophisticated, they're very powerful, and they have many, many options when it comes to bringing in research. They might be interested in what you're doing, but they also know all the competing research, okay? But if they like you, it's a big opportunity. So in that case, number one is easier. Similarly, this one can be easier because of the fact there's a lot of options. If someone doesn't like you, you can go to a competitor. Okay? So number two is easier to get started. But it may not go very far, right? It's easier, you're dealing with smaller players, so it's easier to maybe get the first license, but it may not grow to the full potential because to keep growing, you have to keep starting new licenses. Okay? And the third case is somewhere in between. So the reason for telling you this story is even the nature of the industry you're selling to affects the value of IP. So I was telling you a few minutes ago about the challenge of agriculture. Okay? Agriculture tends, in the US as well as in Thailand, tends to be either the top one or the bottom one, depending on how you look at it. Small number of players, very, very powerful. And they may be looking at your technology, but they have options for a whole bunch of other technologies which are similar. And you're competing against them, those other technologies. So that was one challenge we had with a big amount of the IP that we were working with. The second big challenge was all the industrial IP, the MTech stuff. Okay? Because, I mean, we were working on things like plastic film and that kind of stuff. Well, every one of these steps is a different manufacturer or producer or retailer. And every one of them needs to benefit, otherwise your technology is not going to take. So we had films that were used for managing the outgassing for like vegetables, so they could stay fresher longer. Okay, it's a great technology. Okay, but you had to convince the person who was making the plastic film, and you had to convince the person who was taking the plastic film and making it into bags, and you had to convince the person who was making it into bags and selling it to the supermarket, and even in some ways you had to convince the supermarket to convince the customers that it was a better bag, or at least use it as a marketing promotion. Okay, so this is very typical of a lot of industries. There were a lot of people we could talk to, but it was very, very hard to get things to stick. In this case, only a few people we could talk to, so it was very, very hard because the competition is high. Okay? That's the nature of the world. It's a tough world. So the message here isn't easier or harder, but to recognize that the industry that you're playing in also affects the potential value of the IP or the invention you're working on. Okay? So one of the messages I want to keep talking about here is technology is only a small piece of the whole puzzle. Really, we need to be working on all these value-producing steps. Okay, so I just wanted to give a couple of slides here to make sure we really understand the technology licensing process, although it sounds like there's some experts in the room. But I just want to kind of give you some of my viewpoints on it because I sometimes look at things a little bit differently. All right, so the first thing I like to talk about, so whether you're coming from the private sector or you're a researcher or whatever, I want to try to portray technology licensing as a way of sharing the benefits and sharing the risk. Okay? A technology license, when it's done well, shares the benefits and shares the risks equally. Okay, so let's go on the risk part first of all. What are some of the risks of a new technology? What are some of the risks?
Technology change.
Sorry?
Technology change. The technology change, standard change.
Okay, technology changes. You know, you thought you were doing well, and new technology comes on. Yeah. So technology risk. What other risks are there?
Standard change. Because some standard change. Because it goes to one standard, and the robot goes to another standard.
Okay, exactly. Many industries are built on standards, and if standard changes, that can hurt you. What are some other risks? What are some other risks? I'm being shown a piece of paper that says, I can't read that far. 10. Is that my score? I think I'm being rushed. That's okay, I'm almost done. So technology risks. What are some other risks? if we're talking about us sharing the risk together, we have to understand the risk. Okay, market risk. In fact, all the risks are right here. Everything along this pathway is potentially a risk. Okay? So if you're a researcher, what it means is you need to stay involved. Okay? Your job does not end here. I remember when I was at NASDAQ for the first time, I could never find a researcher to talk to, even though I was the director of the TLO. And we would try to talk to a researcher, and I would say, well, how do we get a meeting with them? It's, oh, they're too busy. You have to wait three months. 3 months to talk to a researcher? I want to share some ideas. No, they're too busy. And then finally I met a researcher one time, and the researcher said, why do you want to talk to me? I'm done. Take it. License it. Okay? And that misunderstands the process. The process is the researcher needs to be involved all of these steps as well. Because every time you're making a change to a product or prototype, and even as you go out and try to communicate with the market, the researcher's input is important. I used to have an old friend, he's passed away now unfortunately, but he was at the technology licensing office at Stanford for many, many years. Okay, they call themselves the OTL, not the TLO, OTL, Office of Technology Licensing. But Stanford's technology licensing office is one of the most successful in the world. They made a lot of money. And he used to talk about all the factors. He had this list of factors that, you know, all the things that he would look at when it came to deciding whether IP was worth commercializing or not. What do you think some of the factors were on this list? You know, he'd say, here's the list of factors to decide whether we should commercialize IP or not. What were some of the things on that list, do you think? You probably had the same list in Chiang Mai. What were some of the things on that list?
Researcher interest with working with TLO.
You've ruined my whole story. That's the last answer. But it is the correct answer, exactly. Have you been to one of my talks before? No, so he would have a list. This is exactly right. He would have a list, and on that list it have things like market size, and strength of the patent, and the royalty percent, and all these things. And somewhere down the middle, at the bottom, it would say, willingness of the researcher to be involved. And he would say, which one's the most important on this list? And everyone would say, market size. And he said, no. The most important one is whether the researcher is willing to be involved. That's exactly right. If the researcher is not willing to be involved, or if the researcher says, I've moved on, I'm working on my next KPI, I'm done with that one, okay, then you have no chance of licensing it, okay, because the other thing that's going on here, this is not only a sharing of money and a sharing of risk, it's building a relationship. The number one thing that a license does from a TLO is not set the terms of a contract. It builds a formal relationship between a researcher and a company. Okay? Really, the percentage that's going to be made is not even that important. We just use simple rules of thumb to the industry. The most important thing is it sets up a relationship, one type of relationship between a researcher and a company. There are other types, right? You could set up to be a consultant. You could set up to do contract research. So there are other ways to set that relationship up. But you should view licensing as a way to set up a relationship between a researcher and a company. Okay? Not just a way to make money. Because otherwise you won't make money. Okay? So this is a sharing of risk and reward, and the risk is all of those steps I showed on the previous slide, including the technology risks that he was talking about and all the market risks that he was talking about. So the researcher needs to be involved in this whole process, along with the TLO and business development people. Okay? And then the rest is sharing in the reward. If the product does well, the better the product does, the better everybody shares. All right? So that's basically how we try to set the value of a license. And most industries are pretty consistent. If you're in an industry like industrial products, You know, most industrial products do not have very high profit margins. The best profit margins on industrial products are what? 50%, 40% from the manufacturer, and then they have to be shared among distributors. You're not going to get a lot of money for that license because the license can only share 30, 40, or 50% of the profit, and even then it's only a small percentage. Okay? If it's something like software or pharmaceuticals, where the value might be very, very high, then you might get a higher percentage. Well, most of them, you're going to get 5%. It just works out that way, because 5% of the selling price is still a big chunk of the profit margin. Okay? If your profit margin is 40%, 5% of the selling, because licenses are built on selling price, right? 5% of the selling price is 1/8 of the profit. Okay? 5 over 40. So it's a significant part, even though it seems like a small amount. Oh, only 5%. It's a big chunk of the profit for most products. Okay? So keep that in mind. The license is not a discussion in profits as much as it's a discussion, how do we work together? How do we build a relationship and take this product to market? That needs to be the mindset that we have. Okay? So when we're sharing this value, we talked about the risk already, both technology and market risk, okay? And we also need to recognize all of the other stuff that comes into the risk, marketing, communications, distribution, maybe even training, if people know how to use it, after-sales services if it's necessary, and all we're talking about really is this value-added part. Your technology may be valuable, but it's not the only value that's being added to the product, right? So there are other things that add value to the product as well. Okay? And of course, other similar, other final considerations is the other thing that comes into play is what other technologies are out there that do a similar thing to what your technology does. The more that's out there, the harder it is for your technology to provide unique value. Okay? So this is the most important message that I want us to get. If you're finishing this session, whether you're coming from the business side or the researcher side, I want us to understand, first of all, the goal we have to have when it comes to creating IP value is to get a working relationship together. Because there's no way of knowing the value of the IP ahead of time. It can only come from working together to go from the lab through all of those technology development steps and then all the customer development steps until we have something in the marketplace. Okay? So some of you may have seen me talk about this before. I really try to put a big emphasis on the need to understand what the final user is going to use your technology for. That's the only way to really visualize the value. Okay? Some other factors that we put in there, things like the industry structure and the distribution channels that are common in the industry also affect our value to affect our ability to extract value. Okay? So that's, I haven't seen the sign come back, but I imagine I'm well under 10 now. So if there's any questions, uh-oh, he's coming after me. It means there's no time for questions. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them, and I think then we're having a break, right? So that just killed any questions. So, are there any questions? You can ask in Thai as well if you want. Okay. If not, I'll turn it over to the MC.
Thank you very much.
Sure. You have it, yeah. So they have my presentation, so feel free to take it and use it, okay?
Okay,ครับ
And you can contact me anytime.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ed, for your valuable presentation. ถ้าไม่มีคำถามแล้วนะครับ เดี๋ยวผมจะเบรกสัก 15 นาทีแล้วเดี๋ยวเรากลับมาเจอกันใหม่ตอน 11 โมงนะครับสำหรับช่วงที่ 2 ของเราครับ แล้วท่านใดที่อยากได้ presentation นะครับ ก็ถ้าลงทะเบียนในระบบมาแล้วเดี๋ยวผมจะอัปโหลดให้ในระบบของ Mazda Academy เรานะครับท่านที่มี ID อยู่แล้วก็เดี๋ยวอัปโหลดไปให้แล้วหลังจบงานวันนี้เดี๋ยวเข้าไปดาวน์โหลดได้นะครับ ก็เชิญรับประทานอาหารบ้างครับขอบคุณดร.อีกครั้งนะครับ